Welcome to Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in Homeschooling. I'm Christine, and today we are talking with Roz, an English home educator who lives in the north of England in Charlotte Mason country. Not only are the Lake District and Cumbria beautiful, but to live where Charlotte Mason educated and developed her principles is special indeed. Roz tells us how she has taken Charlotte's methods and tweaked them here and there to suit her family. We talk about many things, including what it means to say the child is born a person, the importance of living books as the foundation of home education, and the well-known phrase, "The world is your classroom." There is plenty more, so let's get cracking. Well, Roz, I am absolutely delighted to welcome you onto my podcast because not only are you my first British interview, I was also so thrilled to find out that you are a fellow Charlotte Mason educator. So welcome. We're going to have a good conversation.
Well, thank you. It's been a joy. It was, meeting you on Friday was just such a privilege. It was just one of those out of nowhere, God brings something along and just suddenly connections are made.
Yes, I love it when things like that show up. God can just bring the most loveliest of surprises along.
Totally.
Yeah. Tell us briefly, why did you decide to homeschool your children, you and your husband?
We were living in Canada at the time when our two boys were little, and had we stayed there, they wouldn't have started school till they were nearly 6 for formal education. We came back to the UK and it was suddenly like, oh, they're starting in September. No, because they're only just 4 and that just felt too young. And we knew the move that we'd made was only going to be a temporary kind of 2-year, 3-year position. And we thought, well, I'd been around people who home educated and stuff. And so I was open to that. And I quite liked that idea. And I thought, well, surely I can teach my child to read and write. And then we'll see what happens once we've moved somewhere more stable. So we started, and here we are into our 11th year, heading into GCSEs and kind of that stage of life. And we've just kept going.
So when you started then, I think if I've heard you correctly, you're in Canada and 4 was just too young to get them started in Britain. So what was in mind for you and your husband when you started? What was really important for you?
We were coming from an academic background, both of us having master's, PhD level studies, coming from academic families. And so I guess we wanted to make sure we were ticking academic boxes. And there was an expectation to reassure grandparents that we were doing that as well. And people I'd been around had used the well-trained mind, Susan Wise-Bauer, and that was what I was familiar with. So that's kind of where I jumped in with. It felt for me that, I can prove that I'm providing a rigorous education. And then we ended up meeting people who were very much involved within Charlotte Mason and introduced me to Charlotte Mason's philosophy of education and parenting. And it was just like this light bulb went on of just, oh, yes, we can do all the wonderful things and provide an education. And it can be rigorous without feeling like I'm doing a rigorous, dry academic format.
So what was the real comparison between what you had started and what you said you had a light bulb moment? Yeah, what were some of those differences?
Charlotte Mason's quote of education is an atmosphere. And it's just that it was all of life. And it was about the books and it was about the reading and the relationship with our children as we read, relationships as they connected what they were reading with life and with other stories. And it wasn't simply ticking things off or doing exercises or answering questions. This whole concept of narration that's big in Charlotte Mason philosophy of telling back what you know and what you've heard rather than answering set questions. It just meant actually learning was happening in the conversations. That was the learning, that was the education. It wasn't, well, now we've got to sit and answer a set of questions, then we can have a conversation and that's separate. It was all of our life. It was this atmosphere that we got to create.
That's quite a different mindset, really. And I'm thinking back as you're talking to how I had to transition and unlearn something and relearn another approach. So you mentioned the answering of questions. That is, in a nutshell, the traditional way of schooling and testing. And now you had to learn asking for narration. So can you maybe outline what was your journey or evolution like as you learned to undo something and make something else new?
I think, to be honest, I'm still learning it because it was a skill I never had. And so my children are probably far better doing it than I am now. And when I'm now reading, I try and do it to myself. I will try and jot down or tell myself back, what have I just been reading? And it was having to let go of there being a right answer. So when they were telling me stuff, they pick up on different things to the things that I picked up on. And I had to let go of thinking that what I had picked out of the story or whatever it was we were reading was the important thing. They told me what was important to them. And that way I got to know who they were and I could see more of their character. And that helped in all of parenting and all of life because I was beginning to understand who they were rather than just knowing whether they could tell me the right or wrong answer.
So the whole procedure of narration, you and I understand what that is. There would be, I think, an official explanation from a Charlotte Mason perspective, and then there would be the way that we would do it.
Yeah.
So for listeners, can you do that then? What is your understanding of Charlotte Mason's purest idea as a narration, and how have you taken that to make that work in your home?
So with narration, you sit and you're reading a book, and it can be history, it can be maths, it can be English, it can be any topic. And this is the thing, it's not tied to only your stories. It's all of your books because you're reading books that bring everything alive rather than being just textbooks with facts. They're incorporated into story. When they're little, you start off with small sections, like paragraph. And you ask them, what did you hear? What was it that stood out for you? What can you remember that happened in that story? I had 3 children. They could all hear something completely different. And I'm sitting there thinking, did I read the same thing?
Yes.
And it's them telling back. And to begin with, it's done orally and it's just in the conversation. And gradually, and particularly for one of ours who's dyslexic, writing has always been a lot harder to do. So there's a lot of what I would call the big conversation. I think that's a term that Brave Writer uses. It's about the big conversation. It's having those conversations where you're engaging with what they're hearing. And then gradually we've gone to getting them to do written narration. And while their oral narration, could fill up all of dinner time conversation, the written narration would be like 2 sentences. Because the whole process of writing had to be learned, and having to write, to communicate in a written form is different to communicating in conversation. But gradually, our eldest, 15, can write plenty now on his narrations because that's how he's learned.
Yes, and you've read him very good books too, which is a passive way.
Which is where they develop the language, they develop an understanding of how to write, how to communicate in the written word. Their vocabulary expands. Nothing is lost by spending days with them on your lap and on sofas and upside down reading. I remember one time being asked in the UK, the LA, the local education authority, may well be in contact with you about and want to know. And one person said, so where do you sit and do your lessons in the day? And I was like, well, it depends what we're doing. And she says, but do you sit at the kitchen table or do you sit at another desk? And I was just in my head, she has this very clear idea that this is how you do it. And I was thinking, I have a child who is hanging upside down and another child sitting on the stairs, but the conversation's going on and I know they're engaged and I know they're hearing what we're talking about.
Yes, it's completely different. The concept and expectations of what we think, how school should be done But I do remember, like you've said too, that like you're in your 11th year and you still acknowledge that you're learning how
Yes.
best to do it.
And that changes with each child as well. And that's the joy of home educating, is that we get to do that and go, this child, this is how this works for them. This child, this is what works for them. So we'll adapt it, we'll change it to bring out the best. And I think that's one of the beauties then of narration, is because you're not asking them to answer a right and wrong question, you're asking them to tell you what they've heard and what they're connecting to and what relationship they've got. You get to know what their passions are, what drives them. You know, one child could pick out something about the animals, somebody else tells you the descriptive stuff, someone else picks up the human relationships, and you suddenly realize where people are at, and then you can tailor your learning around that.
Because if you'd given them a list of questions regarding, let's say, My Naughty Little Sister.
Yeah.
Love that book, or the series actually.
Yeah.
And you had a little question, and that was your basis as to whether your child had been listening or passed the test. But if they didn't actually hear that the naughty little sister had found the head of an angel in the compost or the pile of rubble, you might think, well, she wasn't listening. But if you'd said to her, well, you tell me what you heard, and she talks about how she found this hole in the fence at the bottom of the garden.
Yeah, and goes next door for Coco from Mrs.
Coco, yes. And yet both of those scenarios, you've got something that is just deliberately set up to make something too hard or potentially fail a child, and the other one where you can see they understood a lot.
Yeah, and that's the joy, and then that shapes everything, and it shapes not just the education, it shapes the atmosphere of your home, because it shapes how you parent them, it shapes how you help siblings relate with each other, because when you home educate, you're living together all the time, and so you get to help them work out relationships really meaningfully. But it means you can help each of them understand, well, yes, you're passionate about this. Like two of the boys, one loves mountains and opera and music, and one is cricket. And they don't necessarily always understand how the other one can hold all this information. And I'm like, the way you can hold that information about cricket, they can hold it about opera and Tolkien and mountains and maps. It's different ways, but that's the blessing of looking at education as an atmosphere, because it then filters into everything of life and isn't curtailed to 9 till 3 school hours.
Are there any other principles or sayings, if you like, of Charlotte Mason that made such an impact on you that it started to change the way you parented?
Children are born persons would be one of the other big ones. And I guess, well, we know that they're their own individual, but it's the remembering how individual they are, and that, yes, they are our gift, and they have our genes, and they express a combination of my husband and I in ways that you think, how did that come together? But you also get to see them as individuals, and you get to see that different things matter to them, different passions. As I said, someone might pick out the descriptive things, someone picks out the human relationships, someone picks out the animals. You see them as individuals. They're not all answering one question and maybe getting it right, or maybe one getting it right and one not. They're expressing who they are and how they connect to the world. And then we get to encourage them to do that.
So one would automatically think that the opposite to that would be to say children are not born persons, but I don't think she means it in that sense. So if that's her approach, and that is part of what typifies to educate in a Charlotte Mason manner, how would you compare it to the worldview that doesn't necessarily see it that way? How is another approach seeing it if they're not seeing the child as born a person?
I think there's almost a fear of allowing children to have their own thoughts and to think for themselves. We want them to learn set things and to follow set paths. And the fear is that if they think for themselves, they might not do that. And that's the unknown. And it's more out of a fear than actually a confidence that they are created beautifully and wonderfully, have been given a brain to think, and that can, if it's given the opportunity to make connections, will make connections that are so meaningful, so significant, that spill over into all of their life.
So in your children, how are you seeing these principles working out as they're now, obviously they've grown up from little children and they're moving now into being young adults? How are you seeing those principles give them freedom as they blossom?
I think dinner time conversations, being able to hold their own opinion, being able to hear other people's opinions, not being afraid to debate without it being that we can't be friends because we disagree. There's room. I think that's so important, and we're missing that, I think, a lot in culture today, to be able to hold different opinions without it being an issue.
It sure is. It's quite an indictment on our current culture.
It is. And I think seeing that and seeing those flourish, seeing them step into the roles that they love, like our eldest, I've mentioned, is cricket, loves cricket, but he's made that into a weekend job that he scores for the local cricket club and he gets paid for that. And he's been able to take that passion and those skills and to do something that he genuinely loves to do.
Is he hoping to track towards perhaps some career options?
He would love to play cricket. He'd love something to do with cricket, but he's also very aware that at the end of the day, 11 men go out to play for England. There's a lot of young lads who are playing cricket up and down the country. So he's keeping his options open, and law and justice, and using his voice because he's got vision and education. He wants to do that. That's, he also is fascinated by science and looks at medical science. And I love it because with Charlotte Mason, we've been able to keep everything open and give him such a breadth of education. He can still play with all of those options without narrowing it down.
One of the things that I loved about Charlotte Mason's principles was she said to know a lot about a little and a little about a lot.
Yes.
And that speaks to that broadness of making sure that they do know all the basics, but they can really drill down into something that they are. I know really passionate is a very much an overused word at the moment, but it does describe it quite well. They have this intense interest. They're gifted, if you like. That's the way God shaped their brain. They're supposed to be interested or passionate about animals or writing or cricket.
Yeah. And I think that's the whole thing with the Charlotte Mason is, we talk about the language of providing our children with the feast. In this kind of buffet, you put out this big feast, this wonderful buffet, and allow them to fill their plates. And so we're providing them with all sorts of opportunities, books, the opportunity for them to explore the world themselves and work out where they are made, how God's made them, what their strengths are, what their passions are, and to fulfill that and go out into those areas and do them well, whatever that may be.
You mentioned before Brave Writer. What is that, or who is that?
That is, I should have checked up on this. I think she's a UK-based woman providing home ed resources. And she's called Brave Writer, and there's various different levels. I've never accessed her paid courses, but there was one podcast she did that she talked about this whole idea of the big conversation, which when I was trying to grapple with narration and get my head around it, just made so much sense to me.
Oh, I shall go looking for that. That sounds really interesting. All right, Roz, when it comes to implementing the Charlotte Mason approach in your home education setting, are you a purist and you only buy her recommendations? Do you buy any of the curricula, or are you a bit of you put it together yourself girl?
I'm a put it together girl. There's lots of options out there of the people who put resources together, and I've used those for book lists. but haven't necessarily followed their curriculum. There's Ambleside Online, Sabbath Mood for Science, various places that I've gone for their book lists and then gone, oh, I like that, and I like this, I like that. And so put it together. We had a period of time where we had a real unsettled moving stage and lockdown was happening. And so I did buy, I didn't buy because it was free, is the Good and the Beautiful language arts curriculum. And that's worked for us. She's not doing Charlotte Mason education as such, but it's all about setting your heart on what is good, true, pure and noble. And so there's lots of beautiful art, beautiful poetry, beautiful stories. So it works within the Charlotte Mason ethos, but works within our family circumstances and situation.
Did it take you long to have the confidence to move away from a prescribed, this is how you do it, to become I'll put it together myself, thanks?
It probably took 2 or 3 years of working it out, watching other people, seeing what others were doing and going, you know what, we can do this, and seeing our children thrive and saying, oh, this is working, and seeing a happier home. Not that it wasn't a happy home, but seeing it a home where there was excitement around what we were reading, what we were talking about, and seeing that spill into conversation when Dad comes home from work. I guess in a way, seeing education as an atmosphere flourish in our house gave me the confidence to keep going, to the point where I've pulled together the high school diploma. We're doing the high school diploma route for our eldest, which is the American qualification, for 4 years. And I've put together that curriculum. Though we're with an umbrella school who will oversee it, I got the freedom to pick what we're doing. And I love doing it. I got excited to see where we could take things, and to see him step into that has been a real joy.
It is really encouraging that you have the freedom to work in a parallel way with the prescribed state-run system. So, but by implication, then, are you using the American high school qualification? Is that as a vehicle to be able to attain university entrance? What have you got in mind?
Potentially university, potentially a qualification. In the UK, it's GCSE and A levels. We will tick off GCSE English and Maths this year and next year, simply because pretty much every job requirement here, just you have to have ticked those boxes of having those 2 exams, because it's how the government wants to prove that you are literate and numerate. I think there are better ways of doing it, but we have to play with what we've got.
All right. So you would have to use their book recommendations or their requirements?
For those 2 exams, you can, I know there are some people who will do it as much Charlotte Mason as they can, but will, at the end of the day, the exam is the exam, and you have to sit. A lot of what you have to do is learn how to do the jumping through the hoops of how to sit the exam. So our son is doing English. He's part of I can't think of the word, a group that does has been doing for 2 years preparation for the exam next month. A lot of it is exam technique, as she says. His vocabulary, his ability to write, because of the fact that we've done Charlotte Mason, is really high. What he has to do is hold it down to exam technique, because he doesn't get to narrate in the exam. And he doesn't get to sit down with the examiner and have a conversation. He's got to answer questions. And exam technique is looking for set things.
For 4 out of 5 of our children, the first exam they did was at the end of their first term in university. One of our boys, who had to do 2 of the state requirement exams because he wanted to do engineering, he had done an exam. And they just learned how to do an exam. They didn't fail or struggle. They were nervous, but everybody is nervous before they do their first exam. It was just delayed by a few years, and my husband and I coached them through how to do an exam, so that wasn't actually an issue for them. One of Charlotte Mason's strong recommendations is to spend as much time as you can outdoors.
Yes.
How does that work for your family?
Not as much as I would like. But what I have taken comfort in is the garden. I live with a long-term neurological condition, which means that I don't always have the opportunity to just go off and go out places. But we've got a back garden and we've put a pond in and we've got bird feeders up and things, and we can just observe and watch in the garden. And then my husband's great at taking them up mountains, and I go when I can. And I remember though, the first times we'd go on nature walks, and I thought, what is the point of this? One thinks they're in Star Wars and someone else is somewhere else. And I'm like, this isn't Charlotte, mate. This isn't what the book said. All of them love being outdoors. The eldest, who used to take every opportunity of nature walks, reenacting Star Wars films, now has a camera for doing wildlife photography. If you had said to me, is that child going to do wildlife photography, when I was doing those nature walks and it didn't look like he was aware at all that he was walking through a meadow of flowers, I'd have said no, not a chance. But what did he want for his birthday? A camera to do wildlife photography.
Aren't we funny? If we could only just, trust the process.
Yes.
And hindsight is always clear, but to trust that, in 5 years' time, have I entirely ruined my child?
No.
This is going to be okay.
Yeah. And so I think it's working with what you've got. And I know there are a number of parents and families who home ed where one parent has got a long-term health condition and they wonder, what can we do? We set it up with a chair in the garden so I can be in the garden and they're out in the garden, and you make it work with what you've got. I think that's what people need to grow their confidence. Is that there may be this philosophy and there may be some people who are doing it in a very purist way, following one very set curriculum, and that's fine, because for some people that's what they need and that's what works for their family. But what I want to say to others is, if that's not your family, focus on the fact that Charlotte Mason says that education is an atmosphere. Whatever your circumstances are, you can create the atmosphere in your home.
Yes, because it's your home and
it's your home. You're home educating. So do it the way that works for you.
I'm just going to reflect again on how you referred earlier to you've been homeschooling 11 years and you're still getting used to a certain way of doing it, or getting better at something, or feeling more relaxed about something. And I would like to encourage people who are listening that that's the reality of it. I mean, we homeschooled for 20 years altogether, and I can tell you that our fifth child had a better deal than our earlier children. And mostly that was because by the time the older ones finished, the relief was enormous. I think I told you the story the other day, how a friend said, "Oh, you must be so proud." And just like that, I replied, "No, I'm more relieved than proud."
Yeah.
But from then on, I knew it worked. I wasn't hoping anymore, but I still needed to unpack my natural, you've got to do it this way, it's not proper, so that by the time our youngest got into her early high school years, I just gave her this enormous pile of anything to do with science, animals, seaside, insects, mushrooms, stars, rather than a science textbook.
Exactly.
And she actually went on to get a zoology degree. She was so ready. In her last year or so of high school at home, we did move her over to Apologia. Are you familiar with
yes.
that? Yes.
Yeah.
Even keeping her away from the proper science textbooks did her no harm whatsoever.
No.
She read Gerald Durrell and anything else to do. It was great. So if we can just encourage those listeners, I would love for them to know that it's okay to have your doubts.
Totally. And you can have your doubts 1 year to the next, and seasons of it going well. And then as children grow and change, their needs change, and we've got the flexibility though to go with those changes, and that's so important, is to do that. And I often see people saying, "Oh, I'm going to home educate. Is there anyone else with children the same age as mine?" And I want to say to them, find those families, that's fine, but also find families with older children. Surround yourself with people who've already walked the walk. They've been the ones that have made it easiest for me. It's great having those friendships with people who are at the same place, but I'm able to be where I'm at because of the confidence people who've gone down ahead of me and those friendships give me.
Yes, they're reassuring, especially on what I would call my black days.
Yeah.
And I noticed fairly soon that it seemed to be only me who had struggle days, and days when I would just throw myself down on the bed crying because it was all going wrong. And then I found out it wasn't. And so from then on, I've been determined to be really honest with other homeschool mums and say there are days like this.
Yeah.
So for you, and whatever that looked like, your black days, how do you manage those down times?
I initially managed them with the threat of, I'm going to phone the local school and you're all going to school. To let's get outside. We need a change of where we're at. We need to be doing something different. And as my children would all say, the thing I would come down on, as I would say, fine, let's ditch times tables because we'll deal with attitude. If there's anything going on, if the atmosphere is off, I will ditch the times tables or the spelling, whatever it is, the school thing for the atmosphere. And I will say, right, we need to rejig the atmosphere. We need to do something, we'll bake, we'll watch a movie, we'll go for a walk, break it and do something completely different.
Good advice. Excellent advice. I've got a couple of quick fire questions for you,
Okay.
Roz. Talking to veteran homeschoolers, people, like myself, we've been out of homeschooling now for, 5 or 6 years. What can the veteran homeschoolers do to help those who are still homeschooling and those who are yet to come to keep going? How do we help?
By not disappearing, by doing what you're doing, by being around to have a cup of tea with, to be honest and say, yeah, we had black days. Yeah, just being a presence, not suddenly just disappearing so that all you've got are current home editors. We need people who've been down the road.
Good, thank you. So I think some people think, oh, they wouldn't want to hear from me. Oh, no.
Oh, we do.
To offer. You do, all right. Scenario, you've gone to a book sale from a library or you've gone to a school fete and there's this wonderful used book. Okay.
Yeah.
What's your criteria? How at first glance or second glance when you pick it up, do you tell whether that's a book you need to buy to take home?
Open it up, read a paragraph, and if it grabs me, I'll go with it. And if that paragraph that I couldn't kind of narrate back to myself, it doesn't excite me, it goes back on the shelf.
Do you look at the publishing dates?
No, for me, I'm not, because I think there can be some really good new books. There can be some awful new books. There's some really good old books and some really not great old books. I do love an old book. Can't resist it. But my test now, for the sake of our budget, rather than just buying it, is open it up. I think it was Diana Edwin, who heads up the Charlotte Mason community in the UK, taught me this one of open it up, to just let it fall open and read a paragraph. Does it grab you? And if it does, and if you want to keep reading, then take that book home.
Good advice. Next quick question then. What are your personal books to equip you that you really couldn't do without?
Well, there's Charlotte Mason's volumes, which give you the overarching philosophy. Leah Bowden wrote a book last year called Modern Miss Mason. And I highly recommend that because that just distills them all down beautifully to put it in your hands, to read now as to work out, how does this work out today? So I think those would be two of my absolute go-to books. And then there's a lot of Sally Clarkson has written various books, both on family and Awaking Wonder. It was her one on education, and she looked back on her life as having educated and what she did and how she did it. And it's gleaming from that. It's so good. I think it was, she said in one of her podcasts, they didn't buy everything for their children, but they bought good quality things. So when their children were painting, they bought them proper paints and proper paper, for doing watercolors. You give them actual watercolor paper, because the difference of just painting on regular paper and actually on watercolor, you produce something different. And so it's buying your children, not waiting till they are proficient in something to buy them good quality products of science, telescope or artwork or whatever it is. But start from the beginning with good quality. It doesn't have to be the top of the range, most expensive, but buy them the proper equipment, because that way they get excited about it.
It also sends a clear message that you think their work is worthy of,
yes,
or to flip it on the other way, saying you're not worthy of top quality things until you reach a certain level.
yes.
What are you doing about mentoring your children as they grow older in like business mentoring or mentors in theology, things like that perhaps the Charlotte Mason doesn't deal with particularly?
I guess with the business, I've not really thought about it. And it's probably something that I need to start thinking about, particularly with our eldest. Theology, in our family, we're surrounded by theology going on. And so they grew up at Bible college environment. Like when we were in Canada, we were in Bible college. Then my husband went on to do a PhD. We've been involved in churches. And so there's always been people around who've spoken into their lives. Having people over for dinner or building friendships up with people. So there may not be someone they specifically, have a one-to-one with, but it's just people in their lives. And when they've got questions, we sometimes will just say, well, why don't you ask so-and-so? Because that's their area. And surprisingly enough, our home education children are quite capable of being sociable. The thing that often people question. And so our children aren't afraid to go and talk to someone else or ask someone else about something. And so we've always done it. I guess it's very much in a spur of the moment when something's come up, we've done it. But we are thinking about looking towards some more one-to-one stuff as they're getting older.
I have had somebody protest using the Charlotte Mason approach, an educator actually, a long-term home educator, who says that, well, she was born in the late 1800s and her education methods were all in the early 1900s. How can her methodology possibly be applicable to a modern world? What would you say in reply to that?
I go back to what I said earlier, children are born persons, and that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed. They still are able to think, they're still able to make connections, and we need that more and more in our world. So I think it's totally applicable. Yes, we may look at using some different books, and we may want to include more up-to-date books, but they still need to be living, they still need to be engaging. It's that feast that you give the children and let them make the connections in the world. Our children are well aware of politics, well aware of cultural stuff going on, age appropriate wise, and they're able to handle it.
What else would you like to say to listeners, Roz? What haven't I asked you?
I think if you're thinking at all about home educating your child, go for it. You're not going to ruin your child's life. There are going to be tough days. There are going to be hard days. But I'm loving the harvest we're reaping now as our children are older. And I know, because I've got friends whose children go to school, they've got great relationships with their teens. I still love the relationship we have out of being home educated, just being around our children all the time. There's just something unique about it.
There is. Well, it's time. It's the quantity of time and the quality that quantity brings.
Yes.
And I think it's fair to point out there is no one perfect way to educate your child. There's going to be flaws no matter which way. But I have very few regrets. Yeah, there's mistakes I made and I'd redo, but no.
Yeah, I think I've got no regrets. There are things I would do differently, maybe. I probably would have loved to have started Charlotte Mason from the very beginning and been aware of that, rather than feeling like I was trying to play catch up while going, oh, I love this, now trying to implement while trying to learn at the same time. I would have loved to have read up on her before we'd got to that point in life and being able to start that from the beginning. But that's a workaround. That's not a regret that I'm going to, let weigh me down.
No, because it's not really going to make any, no, it isn't actually going to make any difference to the outcome.
No.
All right, Roz, now, if you could go back and talk to your just starting out self as a young parent considering homeschooling, what would you tell her?
It's going to work out all right.
And pat yourself on the head.
And go, take a deep breath, enjoy it, enjoy reading, invest in audiobooks sooner than we did.
Okay.
For the sake of my voice, and probably wait longer than I did. Because I was in the UK system and the idea that they needed to start at 4, and so I needed to start home educating formally at 4, even though I was home educating because I didn't want to go into that system, but still feeling that pressure. It was like, no. And we had a child who read at 5, a child who read at 6, and a child who read at 9, all of them avid readers with really good vocabulary and conversation skills. And I learned by the third one, who didn't read till she was 9 because of dyslexia, that was fine. We gave her the Audible books and we read to her books that she was able to grasp and understand. She could follow along to Lord of the Rings being read, even if she couldn't read a simple book. But literally overnight, it all suddenly clicked. And that was it. She was away with it and never looked back. But she dived straight into full-on chapter books when she started reading.
Trust your child. They will be able to do it.
They will. And we had to work through her own tears because she could see her brothers disappear into the world of books on their own. And she was always dependent on either the Audible or us to read her the level of story she wanted. But then literally it was overnight and she was gone. That was it.
We had a child who showed the signs of, we never had any assessment done. We decided we didn't want to do that. But there are all these markers. If you read down the list that if a child has dyslexia, this is what you can expect. There was one thing on there that he did not display, and that was low self-esteem.
Yes.
Because he would never been put into a situation where he felt he was less than, stupid, or everybody else is better than me and I'm always going to be done. Never.
Exactly.
And he also learned to read. And he also has this incredible wealth of knowledge because the way he excels in taking in information is audibly.
Yeah, I would say the same. I remember one person who was a teacher saying to me, if he can't do this at this stage, if they were in the school system, they'd be missing out on art, or they'd be missing out on PE, or they'd be missing out on lunch breaks because they'd have to do remedial stuff. We didn't have to worry about any of that. We just said, okay, if this is how you learn, that's fine. And now it's like, how many pages are we grading? Because at this point, because we're doing the high school diploma, we need to grade things. And it's like, there's pages.
But those years can wait.
Yeah, exactly. Left-handed boy with dyslexia, his body just wasn't ready to do that fine motor and produce the written word until a teen. But now, not a bother on him.
He's a blessed boy, all right. Any other tips you want to impart, Roz?
Don't isolate yourself. Go out, make friends, connect with other people. And if you don't find a group that are doing what you want to do it yourself. Like I used to start Lego groups when we moved house. I would always set up a Lego group and I put it out on the local home ed saying, we'll have a Lego club. And it's amazing how many families appear for a Lego club. Do what you want to do. You're home educating because you want to give your children the right thing for them. You will find companions along the way, but you may have to be the one who instigates things. But you will people will come out of the woodwork.
A wonderfully reassuring place to pop a full stop in, Roz. I'm absolutely delighted with our conversation. I have enjoyed it so much.
It's been an absolute joy.
Hasn't it? And I know that we could go back and we could do part 2, part 3. We could get up to part 10. But
I'd happily keep talking. I love it.
Yes, I can tell. Yeah. Well, I just commend you in what you're doing. You must be quite an important person in your homeschooling community, and I can see why. And blessings on you, Roz. Truly, it's a wonderful life, eh? It was a delight to interview Roz, as there was an instant understanding of each other, since we both used the same approach and understood the why of the Charlotte Mason principles of education. I hope you were encouraged today.